So welcome to this afternoon's or DFI webinar. Today we are going to be talking about bridging the gender gap, implementing digital financial literacy for women. And what we really hope our conversation today will be a little bit of sort of theory, what's happened elsewhere, but also a really practical session, really touching about what's happening on the ground right now and what is working, and getting some feedback on how to help you go around making sure that digital financial literacy isn't a barrier within the services and products that you offer. I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by three fabulous panelists. It's such a pleasure to have real experts on here with me today. So I'd like to introduce you. Firstly, we've got Katie Hygett, who's the technology lead at FinEquity. We've got Wisdom Alouz, who's the African Director of Strategic Impact Advisors, and Sophie Romana, who's the Gender Consultant at Strategic Impact Advisors. So welcome, panelists. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
And for
my pleasure, Sarah.
Great to have you with me. And for those of you that don't know me, although hopefully many of you well do, but my name is Sarah Corley. I'm Deputy Director at Digital Frontiers Institute, and one of my responsibilities is writing a webinar and podcast series and also developing our community. So I'm really excited to be with you today on our webinar. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we officially kick off. So we are recording today's session. So if you do happen to lose any connectivity, or more importantly, if you really enjoy today's session, we'd really love for you to share that recording with your colleagues. So we'll be sending it to you within the next 48 hours, and we highly encourage you to share. Plus also in that email, we'll be sharing presentations and some links for you to follow as a result from today's discussions on our webinar. Also, just to remind you, we have a little panel discussion plan. So we have some questions in advance that we would like to discuss. However, you are our audience, so we'd love to hear from you. So please, if you could use the Q&A function, which you'll see if you kind of hover to the bottom of your screen, please do pop your questions in there, and we will divert our conversation and get round to as many of your questions as we possibly can do today to make it an enjoyable and interactive and useful session for you. Wonderful. Well, that's the housekeeping. The way we're going to do today's session is we're going to have a very short presentation at the beginning by Katie, who's going to sort of set the scene and share some recent information that FinEquity gathered from their community before we launch into a panel discussion. So Katie, I'm going to start sharing your slides and hand over to you.
Perfect. And good morning, everyone. It's really great to be here. It's great to see a few familiar faces in the chat. And it's really great to see names that I'm less familiar with, which means that we have a different audience. So that's all very good. Please do, if you have specific questions, please feel free to share them in the chat, and we will get to them towards the end of the well, at the end of my presentation anyway. And I'll just let you know when it's time to switch over, Sarah. So my name is Katie, and I work with FinEquity, which is a community of practice focused on women's financial inclusion, and it's convened by CGAP, who some of you will be familiar with. CGAP is a think tank at the World Bank Group. So FinEquity is a community of practice of almost 3,000 people and organizations now. So we really are practitioners, researchers, donors, academics, financial service providers, anyone who has a vested interest in women's financial inclusion. It's completely, open to anyone to join, and I'll be sure to send a link so people can sign up if they would like, or just reach out to me if you have any questions about it. We have three main areas of focus, so three different topics that we look at. So there's the technology, or the digitally enabled financial inclusion, which I lead. And then there is our gender transformative norms work, which is led by my colleague Nisha Singh. And then finally, we have an impact pathways, which looks at data and measurement, which is led by another colleague. Last year, we had a conversation, and it was COVID. And so it was a D groups discussion, which is one of the platforms that we use to communicate. And it was on digital financial literacy, and we posed a series of questions around different enablers and constraints. to digital financial literacy. And we had a huge amount of feedback and input from our community. Over 80 contributions with people talking about their experiences, their things that they agreed with, things that they found challenging around digital financial literacy. And so earlier this year, or late last year, early this year, we pulled that into a synthesis. So looking at all of these contributions and what people had to say around digital financial literacy, or DFL as we've come to call it. So I'll just get Sarah to switch over to the next slide. We define as a community digital financial literacy, understanding and addressing the capacity barriers associated with digital financial services for digital financial literacy and its enablers. So really it is looking at the sort of the culmination of financial literacy and digital literacy, and how these together enable the use of DFS. And you can see here that we have enablers, and then we have a constraint, which is social norms. And so I'll talk a little bit more about these on my next slide, but this is kind of the diagram that we have really used to frame the conversation, and it's evolved somewhat because there are certain factors that enable digital financial literacy, so access and literacy, etc. And then there are social norms, which we don't consider, social norms is not always considered neutral, or it is not neutral. So if we can move to the next slide, Sarah. So we have these 5 enablers: literacy, numeracy, consumer awareness, design, access, and then this one constraint, social norms. And the way we have sort of divided or constructed the document has really been looking at, what are the challenges for women? So what our community members have detailed as the challenges around, literacy or numeracy for women. So it could be, with numeracy, it might be that, one of the challenges are that, enumerate women who are not familiar with number systems, they can be very dependent on visual shortcuts, which means sometimes, you can recognize money because it has a certain color or a certain image on it. And so you recognize different denominations or values of money by these visual shortcuts. But when you sort of translate that to digital financial services, that becomes a real challenge. And specifically around literacy, specifically around numeracy, we were very lucky to have amazing inputs from our colleagues at My Oral Village. So Brett Matthews and David Myrie are really at the forefront of this work, which was super interesting to include in a very important component of it. We then looked at, what were the challenges from women's perspectives, and what were the recommendations that we had, that we could sort of provide, and that came from practitioners and financial service providers. So it could be something like, designing for both technology and human touch. Often, when we have digital financial services, we are sort of in a rush to digitize everything and to make everything as efficient as we think it should be. And this is really sometimes missing a big component when suddenly you are no longer providing or facilitating means for women to have these discussions, to become comfortable with certain ideas. So, we know that, by gaining human contact really helps in gaining comfort and competence and confidence in the technology. So, sometimes even when someone has a degree of literacy, physical assistance is still really important, particularly as they are getting started in that DFS journey. So really sort of crowdsourcing what the challenges were across our community, and this is a global community, what some recommendations were. And we were, very, very happy to have so many great resources that were provided. So different toolkits and case studies and reporting that we were included. So we have constructed the synthesis by enabler. So every enabler and the constraint has the challenges, the recommendations, the key resources that we identified and were provided to us by the community that can help with really addressing some of these issues. And then finally, case studies. And we sort of have 4 great case studies around digital financial literacy. We have SIA, which and the Hey Sister work, which you're about to hear a lot more about. And that was in Ghana, but obviously that has expanded now. We had BSR's Her project, and that was in Bangladesh, looking at garment workers and efforts to digitize salary payments. We had Good Return in Cambodia and their work with My Money Tracker. And then finally, we had Aflatoon, and I think the Aflatoon might be here, but they really did some excellent work looking at government social safety net transfers with the Bangladeshi government and UNDP in Bangladesh. So this is all in the toolkit and the synthesis, which I'll share in a moment. And then finally, we also pulled together, yes, thanks, Sarah. Oh no, back to the other side. Some good principles for DFL that were really sort of shared across different enablers and constraints. And they seem quite simple, but I think they're incredibly important to think about and to consider when we are addressing DFL, which is really, where is the user coming from? What is their perspective? We need to understand what they're doing. We need to, this is not a specific issue to digital financial literacy, but I would say digital development more largely, and even development more largely. We need to be very careful that we're not proposing a solution before we understand the problem. It's very easy to sort of say, oh, well, digitizing that, cash transfers, cash payments would solve that, without understanding all of the dynamics that exist just below the surface. Testing, we know how important testing is, but it doesn't necessarily stop when you have launched a project, a program, or an initiative. Using multi-pronged approaches, so not just saying, we're going to run workshops in the village. We are going to also, have messaging on local radio. We are going to put up, posters in doctors' offices. So really thinking about repeating and reiterating the messaging in different ways, and so it becomes more comfortable and familiar to people. Looking at the gendered social norms that are at play and really trying to understand what the dynamics are at the household level, what the dynamics are at the community level for women's mobile phone usage, women's financial service usage, and really trying to not make assumptions about that, but to really seek out what those dynamics look like. And finally, this is something that we forget a lot, but fun is fun, and it's really a great way to learn. This shouldn't be a challenging thing, which is incredibly difficult for people to use and onerous for them to adopt. We need to look at ways in which this is fun. I certainly, from my own experience of using apps, if an app is pleasant to use, if it can sort of make me smile along the way, then certainly it's going to be more memorable for me. So I'm going to send through the synthesis, and I'm going to stop talking now because it's plenty of my voice for the time being. But I'll just end on a link with all of our contact details. I'll put my own email address in the chat. I'll put the link to the synthesis as well. But really looking forward to talking more about this in the next hour. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Katie. And for those of you that have perhaps never heard or don't join D groups, I highly recommend you join. That was how I sort of saw and participated in this conversation, and how very much the idea for this this webinar came around, but also along with input from Wisdom. So actually, Wisdom, you're the first person I'd like to ask a question to, because you are the one who also came to me really wanting to share your story, your successes, the journey that you've made in Ghana with the rest of the community who are interested in this topic. So Wisdom, you know, your perspective, how important is digital literacy for women's financial inclusion?
All right, thank you so much, Sarah. And thanks, Katie, for that awesome presentation. First of all, I'd like to say that I work with Strategic Impact Advisors, which is actually a US-based digital consulting firm. And we do specialize in digital financial services, digital agriculture, women economic empowerment, and then financial inclusion. So for this particular work that we did, which was financed by USAID, basically for us as SIA, our role on that project is basically to develop, digital literacy curriculum, which one we order, the other help to build the confidence of women and then access to digital financial services. I must say that when it comes to importance of digital literacy for women financial inclusion, there is one key, interesting thing I like to share about the GSMA 2020 Women for Men literacy content that they developed, the research that they developed. And it came out clearly that about 3 top, barriers are inhibiting women to enjoy digital financial services, which basically are limited access to literacy, safety and security, and then affordability. And for us as SIA, our digital literacy, service, handles those 2 major areas, which basically are limited access for women when it comes to literacy and skills, and then also promoting safety and security when it comes to adopting digital financial services. And virtually that is something that we have pushed right from the beginning of the program to now. And before we started, we considered some key criteria in order to make sure that whatever we're developing will fit into the existing areas that we're looking at, which are Ghana, Malawi, and Uganda. And we considered more about the gender roles of the women in the bottom of the pyramid. And then when it comes to assessing digital financial literacy, how acquainted are they towards developing it? And what are some of the enabling service providers in the country? Do we have mobile money service providers in the country? Do we also have a strong connectivity on the ground for people to enjoy the content? So basically, those were the key aspects that we really considered. And I must tell you that, right from the inception of the project from last year, November through to now, we've been able to reach over 100,000 people in terms of unique callers enjoying the content, right? And out of which I would say that about 30% were from Ghana, and then the rest Malawi and Uganda. And in Ghana, for instance, we have close to about 23,000 unique callers that have actually called the IVR platform to listen to the content. And out of which I would say about 70% are actually women. So it tells you that it's a women digital literacy content that we've developed, but then we still have men who are also listening. And we can say that we can use this strategy to say that the men could be a potential prescribers to the digital literacy content. And most importantly, we've also considered around facilitator group discussions with local partners on the ground who are also driving the discussion of the content with the women in smaller groups. So I must tell you that this content is very useful for the women. And as we stand now, women are being developed when it comes to adopting literacy, when it comes to building their confidence to use digital financial services, and they are also getting acquainted with the safety protocols that are necessary to adopting digital financial services. So in a nutshell, I would say that is my quick response to that, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wisdom. And Sophie, any additional comments from you?
Yes, well, Wisdom already gave a pretty comprehensive answer. I think, digital financial literacy is important. It's as important as designing for women. So I think we have to look at women's access to the digital ecosystem, if you will, as something comprehensive and as a whole issue. Providing digital financial literacy is only part of the puzzle we're trying to solve, right? What are we trying to do? We're trying to provide them with services that they can use, that can make their lives easier, that can help them manage their businesses better. So I think we have to keep on designing those services with women in mind and making sure that we have some kind of training for them so that they can use it. But for me, it's really, we don't need to start with digital financial literacy before we offer them the services. We can do that at the same time, because if you find value in a service, you're going to learn how to use it. We do that every day as consumers, right? We don't look, how many times have you read the manual or the notice of the new coffee machine you just bought, right? Not very often. So we learn by doing. And that's also an important thing that we need to keep in mind, that it does not need to be very scholarly or very formal, but really meeting women where they are and building those trainings and educational platforms for them so they can use them as they use the services.
And that kind of reminds me, like, one of the things that Katie, you said, sort of teachable moments, like being in the right time at the right place. I mean, there's no point doing a digital literacy. I mean, it's the same thing as doing like an IT course. I remember learning how to use Excel when I was about 19 or 20, and I don't think I used it for another few years. So when you go back to trying to use it again, you've forgotten a lot of what you've learned. So being in the moment and, you know, having information at the right place at the right time when people need it has surely got to be a key concept here that we're talking about.
Also, one of the things we've used in Hey Sister, which is the digital financial campaign we created with SIA, is creating an environment where women who know things can teach their friends. So you don't need to rely on an external person who has the knowledge to give it to you. But Miriam, for instance, we've designed 3 characters in the series and added a 4th one in the 2nd phase. So they have different levels of affluence, different levels of businesses, there are different levels of education, there are different moments in their lives. We've used, for that, we've used the Money and Women report from IDEO.org, and we're creating that place where Miriam has more experience using digital mobile money services, and she's a resource to her friends. And what Wisdom has seen when he went to Ghana, to the groups that we train through partners, is that phenomenon happening as well. So they're mirroring what they're listening to on the podcast, and they're doing it themselves. And it breaks a barrier for them that you don't need to have a teacher to learn. Someone else in your group might know something you don't and is happy to teach you how to do that and to help you get onboarded with that. But Wisdom, sorry, I don't mean to speak instead of you, but maybe if you can share some of those experiences you've seen, that would be interesting too.
Wisdom, would you love to?
Thank you, Sophie. I think we can. Yeah. No. I think definitely as we continue in the discussion, there are some exciting experiences I'll be sharing. So let's just box on. Thank you.
Perfect. So, Katie, are there things that we need to particularly key approaches when designing literacy programs, or are there things to avoid? You know, sort of we're wanting to go on that journey of thinking of wanting to do something around digital financial literacy. You know, how do we take the first steps? What do we need to think about generally?
I mean, I think it's what's challenging is there's no one size fits all approach, and you know, often we sort of hear about something that works very well. You know, dare I say, you know, M-Pesa, you know, that's a golden child, and we think, oh, you know, why wouldn't we do that in you know, the copper belt of Zambia or in Papua New Guinea, and we're sort of we're expecting the similar results or the same results from very, very different raw ingredients. And so I think that there are 2 sort of key things that really came out to me. And one is that we just, you know, you can repeat an approach to understanding DFL, but you can't repeat, or you can't just replicate the outcomes of what that sort of understanding sort of washes up. And so we need to get much better at asking good questions. We need to, and really understanding the environments where we're working. And I think, you know, that sort of speaks a little bit to the point I made earlier around solutions driving problems. And sometimes the best of intentions, it can be, you know, oh, I heard that they were doing this excellent work, you know, which was, working, where they took health workers and they had them trained up as digital financial literacy tutors as well. But I've also heard evidence that has put a lot of pressure on health workers who are already are pressured to immunize or whatever that they're doing on a door-to-door. So I think that sometimes we have these very good ideas that in practice are just not practical. So I think one part of it is really sort of understanding the context and dropping our assumptions as we sort of enter some kind of new piece of work or intervention. I mean, I think the other piece of it is that so many digital financial literacy and digital literacy efforts, more largely focus on one key issue. So it will be, women don't know how to read, and so we're going to create animations, and we're going to put these really great, visual signboarding, posters. We're going to make it very, very clear so that women who can't read or have very low literacy can now read. But actually, that there's very rarely is there one issue. It's often, women might not be able to read because they've never had mobile phones, because there's a negative connotation in the community around women owning mobile phones. And so that's actually just that statement. It's three issues. You're talking about social norms, you're talking about access, and you're talking about literacy. And so when we just say, okay, well, we'll look at the literacy, or we'll look at the access, and we somehow provide access to mobile phones, but they're taken off women at the household because you don't want your daughter or your wife having a mobile phone, or they have these mobile phones but they're not literate, and so they can't use them. We really need to take a much more holistic approach to understanding the problem. And one of the case studies that we included in the synthesis is that of her project in Bangladesh, and they, as I mentioned, are working with garment workers and really trying to create a sort of a workplace scenario where women can learn and be supported by other women within the workplace. So you have peer learning, you had entertainment, videos and games, and it was really sort of, they tried to kind of look at the problem from multiple different angles. And one of those pieces, which I was just, it's so simple, and often these simple things really just beat you over the head, but was saying, taking for every garment worker, they had a letter from the employer, from the garment worker's employer, to take home to the head of the household, explaining why it was important that they had their mobile phone with them, and that they had a mobile phone and that they carried it with them, because that would enable them to be paid. And that, obviously there are some questions there around then what happens to the money, if the head of the household knows about it. But that's sort of a little bit further down the track, and ensuring women actually have a right to a mobile phone and a means in which to get their salary is really looking at it a little bit more broadly. And I think we need to, we really need to sort of look at all of the different barriers and, the root of them, and how they can, how we can ease them, how we can, which of these norms we can not correct, but nudge, and which of them are a little bit sort of a lot deeper and are going to need transformative work, which, yeah. And thirdly, I think we wildly underestimate the amount of time it takes for these things to happen. And we do want sort of lasting change in social norms, and for adoption to really sort of embed itself, then we need to think beyond a 1-year project, a 3-year project cycle. And so this is a bigger question. This is a question for donors as well. So anyway, that's sort of a few key points around what
Okay, Sarah, permit me to just give some ground expertise or ground experience here. So I think in the case of Ghana, Malawi, and Uganda, when we are running this, Hey Sister Digital Literacy Program, there is this common assumption that when you go to the household, men do not allow women in decision making when it comes to financial services, and then financial literacy. But I think we are getting a shift in that particular norm as it stands now. Interestingly, it will surprise you to know that on our program, currently, men are allowing women, or women are becoming key when it comes to decision-making at the household level, right? Men are allowing their wives to be able to participate in digital literacy trainings, and then also engage them further at the household level during the evening to really discuss the digital literacy content, mobile money, scams, and then how to use mobile money to promote their businesses. And the honest truth here is that once they continue to discuss this, there is the decision point where the men allow the women to even go for microcredits, which they use to support the household finances, which one way or the other is a very huge shift in our dispensation as it stands now. So I must say that, I mean, that particular assumption is not really the case at this point. And now when you look at the urban sectors and then the peri-urban areas, a lot of women are really interested when it comes to shifting from basic handset to basic smartphone usage. And one more program that we are running here in Ghana, where we are working, with NetHope to really provide subsidized handsets for women in the bottom of the pyramid, basically entrepreneurs. And it will shock you to know that about 500 women that we are working with, they all showed great interest in this, and they subscribed to, the handsets, and some of them paid about 25%, right? Because we decided that we want to give them 75% subsidy, and they pay for the 25% outright, which is very incredible because they are developing the interest of using mobile internet, using mobile phone to really promote their micro enterprises, which in the past hitherto wasn't the case. So when it comes to reaching the very extreme rural areas, we definitely have to use audio-based, literacy in order to, promote digital financial literacy at the ground level. But when it comes to the urban and the peri-urban, the IVR system where they could call in, listen to the contents at their remote hours, use mobile internet through a very basic phone to access, platform, which one way or the other they use to promote their business, is very key and very important. So I think those are the key, dynamics that we need to really know about when developing, digital literacy programs.
Yeah, I wanted to, if I may also jump in, I think one of the things we've discovered with the Hey Sister campaign is that meeting women where they are in terms of making those audio recordings available to them through IVR at no cost to them, so that they can call whenever they want, whether it's like at 7 a.m. or when on their way to the market or whatever it is, at whatever time it is really interesting and critical, because they don't need to go to a training or a meeting of their savings groups to get that knowledge. They can dial in whenever they want at no cost. The simplicity of the audio also was really key to us, because before we designed the campaign, we looked at what already existed and what we could have access to. And there's always this temptation to go to the nice, new, latest, shiny technology of having videos, but video costs a lot of data. It takes a lot of bandwidth. And it's not necessarily the best way to acquire knowledge. So the audio episodes that we've designed were really interesting in the sense that they hit the spot. We also used a dramatized approach. So we created characters with real lives and real issues that they needed to handle. You know, Annette, our youngest character, is pregnant. It's her first child. She's a young woman starting in life. You know, what skills does she need to acquire to be able to navigate the mobile money environment? Miriam is older, has more experience, and she's a wheeler dealer. She has a business, she has a shop, she has her merchant ID. She's very fluent in using mobile money and all those devices. We were also surprised in the initial 10 lessons we designed to see how much women wanted to learn about protecting themselves on the mobile internet. We had a lesson entitled, protecting myself from scams, and learning how to make sure that the text message you receive on your cell phone is legit. And if it's not, or if you have a doubt, what can you do to check that? So it's really meeting them where they are, which for me is really interesting, and making it as easy as possible, and not just as easy for us practitioners in terms of how can we create our operations so that it's easy for us to deliver the training. Instead, turning the principle on its head and say, how can we make it easier for them to acquire that knowledge? So it's really interesting to see how much women loved to be able to dial in. It was also interesting to see how the partners we worked with told us very early on that the portable audios that you can download from the website onto a phone or a tablet is great, but if you don't have a Bluetooth speaker for a group setting, it's not going to work. So we adapted as we went along. And I want to address, David, it's always good to have you on those discussions, David. Thank you for joining us. But I see a couple of questions about public good and making sure that we don't all keep on recreating a digital financial literacy course that already exists and is not usable. And it's one of the key things we're trying to do with the Hey Sister campaign. By design, because we're funded by USAID, it has to be a public good. So what we've created, the episodes, the facilitators guide, and all the additional support is open to the public. You can download it. Any one of you on the call can go to the website and download the lessons, the audios, the scripts, the facilitators guide, use them, add them to your existing projects and programs. We were tasked with building in that social good and common good. And we're also super excited to see what people do with what we've created, how they use it, how they improve on it, how they include it in their financial inclusion projects and program. So I totally agree with you that there's the public good aspect needs to be reinforced. One thing we have had a hard time to do is we've had several conversations with central banks in the 3 countries where we work with, and we would have loved for those central banks to partner with us and be the public voice and enforcer, if you will, although I really don't like the word, but kind of the sponsor of the digital financial literacy education, and make it a central piece of their legislation or recommendations, or even, fintech sandbox, because that would be very helpful to increase the awareness that those tools are available, they're free, they can be used, and they're critical to make sure that women and men, by the way, use the internet, the mobile internet safely.
I'm going to follow up a question there. And because I've seen a couple of questions come in about, wanting to know, more about more references or more examples of really good digital financial literacy programs. So Sophie and Wisdom, you're describing the ones that you've built, and I'm keen to sort of ask you, how have you know that they've been successful? What outcomes are you seeing so far, which is why you were A, included in the FinEquity study, but B, also on the webinar with us today? What impact have you made, and why, sort of how is that tailoring your product even more to go forward?
Wisdom, you want to answer, and I'll come after you?
Sure. Thank you, Sophie. Thanks, Sarah. For me, I think when it comes to impacts, it depends on the which angle you are looking at. And then for us as SIA, we want to look at impact from the perspective of the user, the end user, right? So for us as SIA, when we started off this, we actually didn't have a very huge plan for M&E, but then we developed some structures in order to capture data from the users, baseline data, and then have a midline and then end line, right? And we doing this basically from our country teams. They throw calls to the women, really ask them about the sort of episode they have listened to. And interestingly, when you look at our episode, it spanned across mobile money, savings, budgeting, tips for enhancing entrepreneurial business, how to use a smartphone and apps to promote your business. And in fact, we have great testimonies coming from the ground, right? A couple of women will tell you that formerly I used to be a victim of scam. But then by the intervention of this content, I am very now vigilant to people who call in to scam, right? Which is, a life-changing testimony. And a couple of them will also tell you that, after listening to the content and learning, I've been able to develop a savings culture. I'm able to save money on my mobile money accounts. I'm able to join a savings group in my community to save funds. And then they keep on telling you that a couple of times, since the content are free and available, they have it on their Bluetooth speakers. They can equally go back to it and be able to refer to the content as a refresher course. So for me, some of these points really tells that we are really making some great impact out of, implementing this program on the ground. And if you look at the numbers that we have reached, from last year, November through to now, it's very phenomenal, right? We have close to about 100,000 plus unique listeners who have really called the IVR platform to listen, right? And the local partners we are working with, the likes of microfinance institutions, women advocacy groups, and then other organizations on the ground are really promoting, the discussion of the content among their women in smaller groups, right? And so far from November through to now, we've been able to train close to about 40,000 people, right, through this smaller groups meeting. If not because of COVID, we would have achieved more than this. So for us as SIA, we believe that it is a public good, and we are looking forward for a lot more partners to join. And another amazing thing I'd like to talk to you about now, before I hand over to Sophie, is that we started off in Ghana with Vodafone, where people can call 321 to listen to the contents. But then for now, MTN is coming on board, which is a market leader, and they are ready to, host the content on their platform for free, without SIA paying anything, without the end user also paying anything. So it tells that it's really a good product, which is making traction in the bottom pyramid. Over to you, Sophie.
Thank you, Wisdom. I'm really glad that you mentioned MTN, because I was going to say that's another form of impact. And MTN has been a wonderful partner to work with in Ghana, and also potentially in Uganda, to broaden our platform. And the most extraordinary thing is that they haven't asked us to customize the content to their product. So they recognize the value of having educated customers who can make their own decisions and make their own choice. And for me, that's an enormous win, that a major player like this would just come to us and say, help us get the message through. The other one I want to mention here, we've been working with BSR and the HER project, and they've reviewed our content and adapted their curriculum in Cambodia based on the episodes and the scripts we had written. And they could not just take our episodes and translate them into Khmer, because what they're doing is very different than what we do. But some of the content we use, they literally put it into their own scripts. So that's exactly why we created Hey Sister. We're curious to see how people are using it, how it's inspiring to them, how they're modifying it, how they're integrating it. Because we think it's a very flexible platform, basically, of services and tools that people can pick up and adapt. And that's part of how we show the impact, is having different types of partnerships, different types of organization coming and using it.
Yeah. And
I
Sarah,
just
go ahead,
can I just I just wanted to comment on there's a comment in the chat from Alfred Yaboa, which is talking about agent networks and women being more comfortable transacting with female mobile money agents. And some other work that we sort of undertook last year at FinEquity was really about, it dovetails into this quite nicely, because it was around the myths and assumptions of women's financial services, and what the things that we kind of believe to be true, and how often they sometimes are true and sometimes they're not, but they're easy to, I guess, repeat. And so actually women's-led banking found that, in some countries, absolutely, where social norms and gender norms might limit a woman's ability to leave the household and go to an agent, or even just interact with a male, that definitely meant that women were not only preferring women agents, but they almost had to use women agents. But they also found that, that was in Pakistan. In Nigeria, they found no difference. There was no difference in what gender agents women or men, women preferred, men or women. And we've also heard anecdotal evidence that women sometimes, women don't necessarily support other women always, or trust other women. And I've heard anecdotal evidence that some women prefer male agents because they don't believe that women agents could possibly know what they were doing. So I think this just highlights how important it is to test our assumptions and to really understand, what is happening. And I'm not quite sure where you're based, Alfred, but we're all sort of working across such diverse communities and contexts. We can't, it's important. This work really highlighted to me just how one thing can be absolutely true in one context, and I'm not sure where you are, but also not be true, just in another part of the country or across the border or another part of the world. And so we really can't shortcut the sort of the exploration and research phase where we're understanding how to improve digital financial literacy, because if we base digital financial literacy effort around women only going to female agents, there could be some unintended consequences there that we would completely unaware of. So yeah, I would be interested to know where you're from though, Alfred, and thanks for the comment.
I wanted to, Sarah, if I may address, Robert had a question about, the narrow attention span and how we design those lessons. And I thank you so much for the question, Robert. So when we were in design phase, we spoke with a lot of peer organizations and sister organizations to learn what had worked for them, what didn't. Our friends from the Grameen Foundation, for instance, were really key in helping us understand that we needed to make bite-sized lessons. So exactly what you're saying, talk to the short attention span we all live under, and with actionable steps that they could take right after listening to the short 2 or 3 minute lesson. So all the 23 lessons that we have right now are about 2 to 3 minutes long. They're all centered, they all have a dialogue, which is engaging. We found it engaging. We actually, all those organizations we worked with reviewed the content, and in some cases told us that we needed to have more male voice through the episodes to make sure that we enrolled men as supporting characters in their wives and sisters and daughters learning journey. We also needed to have a younger entrepreneur. So it was really essential for us to have a group of organizations that was, and we're so thankful to them for the time they spent reading our scripts and giving us comments and helping us find the right tone. And it was something we were very much aware when we designed the first phase of the campaign, is striking the right tone. We didn't want to be condescending. We didn't want to be too scholarly. We really wanted to be more like a telenovela, like a series you can listen to and be engaged by the lives of the women. But the second thing I also want to say is that one of the most important things we can do is to help switch from those pesky feature phones that are so hard to use. You have to remember stars and pound signs and series of numbers that we have all done without, for like what, 20 years here now. And there was a recent case study, I think, published by CGAP in Malawi, clearly showing that women prefer using a smartphone, like we all do, because they're so much easier to use. So what can we do to put that technology in the hands of women that can really help them use services that are useful to them, instead of constantly having to remember your PIN code, your star 165 or 321 or whatever those short codes are that are useful, but they're not the last mile. We really have to push for wider adoption of those smartphones and making it easier for women to use that technology.
I think that's right, but we also have to meet women where they're at. And, it's really important that, I don't want to dismiss feature phones, because there's a huge amount that can be done with basic and feature phones. And there are lots of environments where it's just not realistic that smartphones will be in any way commonplace in the immediate or middle term future. And are we not going to do anything there? I don't think so. I know that's sort of not what you want to do either. But but I think, just let me finish, you know, we need to think about the, you know, the energy requirements. Your smartphone has to be charged every day. If you are off the grid, that is not realistic. You have to pay someone to charge your phone. If you know, you can't get connectivity, you can't get connectivity, your phone just runs through energy like nothing else. Cost of data is experienced. In a perfect world, we would have affordable smartphones for everyone, and there would be an easy rollout. And there are definitely things that we can do to move towards that and encourage that. But, you know, I'm thinking of Papua New Guinea, I'm thinking of parts of the Pacific where this is not realistic in the near future. Only 15% of the population has access to the grid in PNG. So I think that rather than sort of discounting feature phones, yes, they have limitations. Yes, they are, you know, they are cumbersome to use, but there are still things that we can do with them. And as practitioners, I think that we need to be creative, and we need to, you know, partner. You know, think about community radio, think about community organizations, and, you know, not have this sort of one size fits all approach. IVR is fantastic. It's one of these, you know, Hey Sisters IVR work is really well suited to feature phones. Yes, it is slightly more complicated to access, but, you know, you can do amazing things with IVR and community radio and text and quizzes and things. So I think, you know, and I know that, Sophie, you're a real, you know, advocate of kind of that sort of grassroots creative work, but it is so easy for us to say smartphones are the answer. Smartphones are not the answer. Mobile phones weren't the answer. You know, they're tools.
It will take time. It will take time, but we have to keep on pushing for that. I think it's not going to be an overnight shift from feature phones to smartphones. And you're right that in some markets, you know, the smartphones won't work. But we can't also ignore the demand from women. They're very much aware of smartphones, and they're very much aware of the capabilities that smartphone offers to them. So again, thinking in terms of what they want. It's going to be a transition, but I think the end goal is really putting that technology, for me at least, it's putting that technology in their hands and pushing governments to increase their investment in broadband. And it's a whole approach we need to have to make sure that this happens. But Wisdom, you also have your point of view on this.
So I think the smartphone versus basic phone conversation is quite interesting. And coming back from the field, I will say that at the moment, for our women who are in the bottom of the pyramid, in the extreme rural areas, there is no way they will go for smartphone. So for those category of customers, I will advise that we'll continue to push digital literacy through the basic phones, right? Which basically has to do with the audio base and stuff. But then for women who are in the urban and peri-urban, who are not that very literate, they are still enjoying and they would like to use their smartphones, right? Though some of them may not be able to acquire all upfront. And that is why I was advocating that there should be programs that subsidize these handsets, the smartphone for these women in peri-urban and then urban centers, so that they'll be able to acquire and then also come to the limelight when they come to adopting technology. Now, I see a question in the chat box that is around, have the central bank not wanted to promote the program, digital
I'm
literacy?
glad you sound that one, Wisdom. And I'd like to broaden that question out a little bit for you, because I think there's 3 or 4 questions that are interesting and along similar terms. So, you know, I think we've got people asking, how can they be involved? How can they either work with you? Because we've got Tulupe from Nigeria, who would really be interested in discussing what working with SIA. But we've also got the questions around, you know, how do we engage the big players like the central banks, maybe microfinance associations, bankers associations? What partnerships do we need? How can you and how can us on the line also play a role in trying to push forward financial literacy? Wisdom, I'll start with you as I interrupted you, and then I'll come around sort of Sophie and Katie to finish off the session, because we're almost at the end.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sarah, for broadening the scope for the question. I must say that on our current program, Hey Sister, in Ghana, Malawi, and Uganda, there have been a little bit of interest of the central bank to promote digital financial literacy. It didn't happen at the initial stage. initial stage, they didn't show much concern. But upon hearing the sort of impact that we have made over the short period of time, I think the interest is now on the rise. A typical example is Malawi, right? So as we speak now, we have the Central Bank of Malawi, the Reserve Bank of Malawi, interested in, customizing our content in partnership with the Ministry of Finance team, FAMC, to really, promote the scope of Hey Sister and even add additional contents. And they are willing to even promote that on the IVR platform up to 2025, which is quite amazing. SIA ends its Hey Sister program by December, but then they want to continue, add additional scope, work with the same technology partner, promote this for the next 3-4 years, which is quite impressive. And then it's quite similar to Ghana as well. When we had an interaction with the central bank, they showed great concern about this, but then they do not really have the funding to promote it at this point. But they are willing to connect us with partners who can really promote this at the bottom of the pyramid. So the interest level, is quite high. But then when you are starting in a particular country, you may not get that interest, but you need to start off from somewhere. Whilst you build momentum, they will certainly come in and then push it out there. Yeah. Let me allow my colleagues to also add more since we are out of time.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Wisdom. I think it's critical to onboard the governments and the central banks. Somebody in the chat is mentioning the national digital financial strategies or the financial inclusion strategies. So we need to do more advocacy work, basically. I also think that regional aggregators like the BCAO, for instance, in West Africa would be a great place to start when we start promoting Hey Sister in French, because they work with 8 countries. So that those kind of places would be great to advocate as well. But Katie has also ideas about this, so I want to hand it over to her.
I just really seconding what you're saying. It's a great point by Barclay. I think that the central banks often have financial inclusion units, and what's been really heartening to see in recent years is the sort of the increased interest and the increased focus from these the Centre for Financial Excellences and the different financial inclusion programs on digital literacy and digital financial literacy, and really understanding that this isn't a matter of if you build it, they will come. In terms of mobile money, there needs to be some really concerted efforts and some targeted efforts and some, very much different community focused efforts. So, it's a slow gain, but it's, we're definitely seeing the momentum, and it's very exciting, and it's very, it's very interesting when we can get into the weeds with our colleagues and really sort of understand just how sort of complex this is, because it would be great if there was a sort of one size fits all approach, but sadly that is, I don't think, ever going to be the case. So yeah, it's great to have so many colleagues who are now increasingly focused on it.
Brilliant. Well, I think the key, we've debated and we've discussed it, and I think as you said, no one size that fits all, right? And if we could create a digital literacy program, have it translated into every language in the world and send it out there, then wouldn't that be wonderful? But actually, we know from our just the debate around feature phones versus smartphones and how they're used in different, even as she says, Wisdom, rural to urban, within one country there's a difference, let alone when you start unpicking what that looks like, across the globe. We've got social and cultural norms which differ widely, as you said, Katie, about some people prefer to interact with women agents, other women don't, would prefer men, but actually that differs between beliefs, country, context. There's so many things that we can't create this or one size fits all, but actually what we can do is learn from the principles, but also try and engage and work together to adapt what is out there, what does exist, and to push and promote it within our countries, our governments, even our own businesses. If we're online from a bank or an M&O, we can go back to our organization and say, hey, why are we not doing more around digital financial literacy? There's lots of, there's this great paper we can go read that, we can reach out to SIA and get some advice and some, and move things forward. So I guess this is always the question, and I remember I've been asked this question so many times: whose responsibility is digital financial literacy? And actually, I think from our discussion today, I think it's everyone's, right? It cannot sit on one person's or one organization's shoulder. We all need to get involved and bring it up in conversations and try and make sure that, we're raising awareness and doing what we can where we can.
Yeah.
I love today's session. Thank you so much, Katie, Sophia, and Wisdom.
It was great. Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much.
And we really hope you've all enjoyed this discussion today. We'll be sending the recording and some of the links that we've shared and contacts to Katie and Sophia and Wisdom that you can follow up with them and continue this conversation after today's webinar. So thank you very much, everyone. And I look forward to seeing you all in a webinar soon.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you
Bye-bye,
so much,
everyone.
everyone.
Enjoy the rest of the day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.